Howdy, Immortalium here. Today I'm reviewing the hardcover Uzumaki from Viz. So basically this is a horror series. Uzumaki means spiral in Japanese. Nothing to do with Naruto Uzumaki. I've actually seen a surprisingly large amount of confusion online. People wondering, is this anything to do with Naruto Uzumaki? It certainly isn't. It just, Uzumaki means spiral. Okay, so before I start talking about the series, let me run into the plot a bit. So basically, this series is set in a town called, is it Kurozucho? I think that's how it's pronounced. And we follow two characters, Kirie and her boyfriend Shuichi. Basically, this plot of the story is kind of be broken up into two parts. The first 2/3 of this book are basically kind of standalone stories, each dealing with the curse of the spiral, and the last third is kind of an ongoing kind of how can one describe it? It's like an ongoing catastrophe, one can say, where a lot of elements from the previous stories are brought into play. So that's the plot. So first of all, my most major criticism of the series, and it's a very easy one. This is a horror series, and I've only read one other horror manga, at least only one other, like I've read plenty of manga that has horror elements, but only one manga that's kind of pure horror, and that is Higurashi. And so if I make comparisons to another horror series, it's going to be Higurashi, okay? But the main issue with Uzumaki is that it just didn't scare me. There's lots of interesting ideas, there's lots of kind of freaky, gory, grotesque kind of images presented to you, but there are, like, it just didn't have the same impact that certain scenes from Higurashi did. Like, certain scenes from Higurashi are kind of imprinted into my memories, and I've only read the first 4 volumes of Higurashi, but certain scenes from it are, like, imprinted inside my head simply because of how spooky and creepy and disturbing they are. And I never got that feeling from Uzumaki. So that's my biggest criticism of it. But besides that, let's just run into kind of the two aspects of it. So the first aspect's the individual stories. The individual stories, I wouldn't go so far as to say predictable sometimes, because they can be kind of surprising. But okay, first volume. It mainly seems to be kind of made up of stories in which a certain character from the school that Kirie goes to is introduced, and by the end of the chapter they end up dead from the spiral, in a creepy, weird or disturbing fashion, but they end up dead. So that kind of got predictable after a while. Now, there was still a lot of interesting ideas from it. There was lots of, like, sometimes they wouldn't die, in quotations, because they just kind of become something else. I don't know how to even describe it without spoiling stuff. Basically, that something horrible would happen to the new character, and that they're going to probably be gone somehow by the end of the chapter. But it was still interesting because of lots of ways that the kind of supernatural took place. Middle part, basically, again, it's mostly individuals, but there, again, well, actually, it's new. There's kind of a sense of continuity. Like, for example, there was this one point where Kirie got injured from one of the incidents, so she actually ended up at the hospital because of that, and then stuff started happening at the hospital, and it actually kind of became like a 2-chapter kind of story. But my biggest criticism of a lot of these kind of individual stories is that they're kind of not the best resolved, in my opinion. What I mean by that is these stories all have, like, really strong kind of supernatural elements to them. So it seems surprising to me, like, that throughout many of the stories that a lot of the people in the town still don't believe in any kind of supernatural aspects. There's lots of weird stuff happening, but everyone seems to be ignoring it. Only Kirie and Shuichi seem to actually, be acknowledging this stuff. Which is interesting because a lot of stories seem to be very open-ended. What I mean by that is it kind of ends on a kind of a shock point. I guess you could say a climax, but just for me, it just felt kind of unresolved, a lot of these other stories. So that was a constant annoyance. The last third of the volume is, how can one put it? Okay, it's a big one continuous story about, you know, a crisis, one can say. And a lot of the elements from these individual stories go into this last third, making up everything. And this was definitely the best part of the book, in my opinion, simply because it's more kind of cohesive, it's more kind of, there's more resolvement, etc., etc., and lots of fascinating ideas. Definitely the last third is the best part, in my opinion. So overall, it's good, I would say, but not quite the masterpiece. I mean, at the very back it says here, this bizarre masterpiece of horror manga. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a masterpiece, but it is good. Now, to go into the artwork itself, the artwork has a very, how can one describe it? It doesn't feel like manga, in my opinion, the art style, because for one, this is probably the most proportionally correct looking eyes that I've ever seen in a manga. If I can get you a good example here. So basically the artwork is very detailed. It's got nice levels of shading and, you know, etc., etc. It looks very good. That's the best way to put it. And if you want kind of an example of horror scenes, I've tried to get something from the first chapter, so it's not much of a spoiler. You have that. And it's presented very well, it's gotten a great sense of impact. The art style really suits this, and actually I would argue that the art style of this is better than the story, in my opinion. I really like the art, so I would love to see kind of more other works from this creator, and I think there is another series called Gyo, I think. But that's another horror series, and I'm just wondering, you know, since Uzumaki is kind of his most popular work, will Gyo be as, you know, will it fail to scare me as well? So basically I'm sounding very negative. I'm saying, you know, that it's not scary, and I'm saying that some aspects of it are unresolved, but there's a lot of fascinating ideas, and it's got very nice, very clean looking artwork. So I do recommend it. Just don't go into it expecting what it calls the horror masterpiece. Now, that's the manga itself. Let me talk about how Viz has handled this. So first of all, this is a very nice looking hardcover. It has kind of a matte feel with kind of the glossy Uzumaki symbols. It's actually, rather than having just simply the paper, you know, pressed up against the spine, it actually has the treading, which gives it a really nice kind of feel. And all the color pages are intact. Basically, there's kind of 3 sets of color pages, one can say, one at the beginning of each kind of volume. So if I had to show you the very first one, it would be this. So that's like first chapter, and like the color pages are really nicely done. So I'm very happy about that. From a size perspective, it's same as Viz Signature for anyone who, you know, is into, you know, Viz Signature, which is their kind of seinen kind of section. You'll know what size it is. For anyone else, I will just get out. I always use this for comparison, I don't know why. It's about this size here. So it's bigger than the standard manga volume, which is good because you get to see the really lovely artwork in great detail. Now, if I had one particular criticism of this, presentation from Viz, is that the paper, while it's very high quality, it's like amongst the most highest quality paper that I've actually seen from Viz. It's a bit thin. Every so often you come across sections of page bleeding, which is kind of uncomfortable. So if Viz had just made the pages a little thicker, this would probably be like one of the best, you know, produced, you know, books of manga that I've ever seen. But they didn't, so that is an issue. Now, I've never actually seen the original Uzumakis, so I don't know if they have this. But there's kind of there's a chapter here called the Lost Chapter. It obviously takes place during the kind of first 2 volumes of, but it's presented after the story concludes. So just to warn you about that, because I wasn't actually expecting that. I was reading the last chapter and I was kind of going, oh, it seems a bit long. And then I finished and I was like, what? And then I moved on and I went, oh yeah, okay, there's another chapter. So basically, I do recommend this. It's, you know, it's a great read, it's got great ideas, but I don't know, I guess I was expecting a bit too much from it. That's probably what my issue was. So, yeah, I recommend it. Thanks for watching, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.